She thought it was just a starving kitten, half frozen, shaking under a flickering street lamp, its breath barely visible in the icy air. She gave it milk. That's all. A single act of mercy. But what Clara didn't know was that this kitten carried a secret, one not meant for the ordinary world. Later that night, as the wind howled through the trees and shadows danced across her windows, something returned. Not the kitten, but something older, wilder. And it was looking for her. Stay with us. This is not just a story, it's a warning. In the quietest moments, fate speaks the loudest. The cry beneath the lamp. The wind howled low over the pine-covered slopes of Estes Park, Colorado, where snow fell in a curtain of white silence. It was the kind of cold that pressed into your bones, the kind that made doors groan and windows whisper with frost. The night seemed to breathe, slow, steady, and waiting. Clara Myers, 42, pressed her gloved hands deeper into her coat pockets as she walked the edge of her cabin's gravel path. Her breath came out in slow clouds. She hadn't meant to be outside so late, but a trip to the woodshed to grab firewood had turned into a moment of stillness beneath the stars. Out here, surrounded by quiet, she could finally think. She looked every bit the kind of person who belonged in solitude. Long auburn hair pulled back into a loose braid, tired green eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses, layers of wool and fleece bundling a figure still lean from years of hiking these ridges. Clara hadn't spoken to anyone in person for nearly a week. She didn't mind. The silence was safer than the noise of the past. But on this night, silence had a crack in it. A sound, faint, almost imagined, slipped through the wind. Mew! Clara turned, squinting toward the end of her long, snow-covered driveway. Beneath the street lamp that buzzed with frostbitten electricity, something moved. Something small. Another cry came. It was desperate, broken. She hesitated. Then her boots crunched forward across the snow. It wasn't until she got within 10 feet that she saw it clearly. A kitten, no bigger than a loaf of bread, curled against the concrete base of the lamppost. Its fur was gray, dappled with white and cinnamon, barely visible beneath the icy crystals clinging to its tiny body. The ears, black-tipped and triangular, stood straight despite the cold. Its short tail was tucked tightly under its body, trembling. Clara blinked. It wasn't a house cat, not exactly. Its proportions were different. The legs were longer, the paws wider. Its coat had a faint, wild pattern. And those eyes, amber gold, too ancient for something that small. A bobtail lynx kitten. "Good God!" Clara murmured, kneeling slowly. The snow soaked through her jeans, but she didn't care. She reached out gently. The kitten didn't move. "I'm not going to hurt you," she whispered, pulling off one glove. The cold bit into her skin instantly, but she cupped her palm, letting the warmth hover near its tiny nose. "You're freezing!" It didn't resist as she scooped it up. It was too light, bones under fur. No more than 2 pounds, maybe 7 weeks old. Clara stood quickly and carried the kitten to the house, pushing the door open with her shoulder. The rush of warm air hit them both like a tidal wave. Inside, the cabin glowed with the soft light of a wood-burning stove, and old Edison bulbs strung across the rafters. Paintings hung on every wall, watercolors of forests, owls, rivers, and in a corner stood an easel covered in a dusty white cloth. She hadn't painted in 3 years. Clara set the kitten down gently on a thick plaid blanket by the stove, then rushed to the kitchen. She heated some milk in a small saucepan, careful not to scald it. Her hands shook slightly as she poured it into a shallow ceramic bowl. She crouched again by the stove, nudging the bowl toward the kitten. "Try," she said softly. The kitten sniffed, uncertain. Then, slowly, it began to lap, tentative at first, then desperately. Milk spilled onto the floor. But Clara didn't mind. She watched as its ears perked slightly and its eyes fluttered open, brighter now. Clara smiled for the first time in days. "You're not from around here," she murmured. She examined it more closely. Short tail, broad paws, black ear tufts, and that unmistakable golden gaze. A North American bobtail lynx, rare for this area, and even rarer to find one alone. The realization made her chest tighten. Where was the mother? Her mind flashed with images of wolves, coyotes, cold. But she pushed the thought aside. "You're safe now," she whispered. "Just for tonight." As the kitten finished drinking, Clara wrapped it gently in a fleece scarf and placed it in a small box lined with towels. She set the box beside the fireplace and sat back with a sigh. Outside, the wind picked up. The chimney groaned. Wood popped in the flames. And somewhere in the trees, not far from her cabin, came the soft, dragging crunch of snow under heavy weight. Clara turned toward the window. Nothing, just trees and darkness. Still, something unsettled her. She stood and locked the door. Just a precaution. Back by the fire, the kitten slept, its chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. Clara watched it for a long while. Something about it was magnetic, familiar. Not like owning a pet, but like remembering someone she hadn't seen in a long time. Eventually she rose and turned out the lights. But even as she lay in bed, sleep wouldn't come. She couldn't shake the image of those eyes. And she couldn't shake the feeling that something had watched her bring the kitten home. That something else had been waiting. What Clara didn't know was that the snow-covered silence outside her window was only the beginning. Something had shifted the moment she opened her door. And soon, the forest would come knocking again. Not for help, but for something it had left behind. Ash in the firelight. By morning, the snow had buried the world in silence. Outside, the trees stood like frozen sentinels under heavy white blankets, their branches drooping, their shadows long and unmoving. Clara stirred from bed, her fingers numb despite the heated blanket. She reached for the robe slung across the chair and padded quietly into the living room. The fireplace had burned low, leaving only amber coals. The kitten, still nestled in the scarf-lined box, was awake. It blinked up at her, those amber eyes glimmering in the dim morning light. "Hey," Clara whispered, kneeling beside it. "Still with me." The kitten stretched slowly, revealing surprisingly long legs and oversized paws for its tiny body. It didn't meow. Instead, it gave a short, breathy huff and tilted its head to the side, as if studying her in return. "You're different," Clara murmured. She placed a fresh bowl of warm milk nearby. This time, the kitten approached without hesitation. Its movements were more coordinated, more confident. After feeding, it hopped out of the box and began padding around the room, sniffing the corners, stepping lightly on the hardwood floor, inspecting the low bookcase beneath the window. Clara watched it with cautious wonder. No limp, no staggering, no trace of the weakness it had shown just hours before. "I need to call someone," she muttered, more to herself than to the kitten. "You're not supposed to be here." She stood and crossed to the kitchen, dialing the local ranger station. The voice that answered was low and gruff. "Ranger station. Ben speaking." "Ben, it's Clara Myers," she said, wrapping her robe tighter. "I found a bobtail lynx kitten on my driveway last night. Alive, barely. Brought it in." There was a long pause. "Alive?" Ben asked. "In this storm?" "It's healthy now," Clara replied, glancing toward the living room. The kitten had disappeared from sight. "You sure it's a bobtail lynx?" "Yeah. Short tail, wide paws, black ears. About 2 pounds. Maybe 6 or 7 weeks old." "That's unusual," Ben said, his voice dipping. "They don't usually come down this far into town, let alone alone." "I thought that too," Clara admitted. It was just sitting under the lamppost like it was waiting. Another pause. You should bring it in, Ben said. Could be sick or orphaned. Hard to say without seeing it. Clara hesitated. I'll think about it. She hung up, but didn't move. Something told her not to take it in. Not yet. From the corner of her eye, she caught movement. The kitten had climbed onto the fireplace mantel, somehow, and was sniffing the dried pine cone garland hanging there. Clara blinked. You're not supposed to be up there, she said softly, walking over. The kitten didn't flinch. It turned to face her, completely unafraid. Its golden eyes locked onto hers. She felt a strange pulse in her chest, like an echo. She reached out. Let's get you down. But the kitten leapt lightly to the armrest of the nearby couch, then to the floor, silent, fluid, like it had lived there its entire life. That was the first moment Clara began to feel it. Not just awe, but something deeper, something unsettled. She tried to brush it off. She brewed coffee, cooked a little oatmeal, and put on a thick knit sweater over her flannel pajamas. As she sat down at the small dining table, she glanced toward the fireplace again. The kitten was sitting on the hearthrug, staring at the flames, unmoving. Later that afternoon, Clara opened the cabinet under her old easel, something she hadn't touched since Luke died. She felt the dust on her fingers as she pulled out the covered sketchpad. For years, she'd been unable to draw. No inspiration, no fire in her hands. Grief had turned her vision to static. But now, her fingers tingled with that old itch, the compulsion to sketch. She peeled back the paper cover. Charcoal, soft pencil, open page. The kitten sat nearby, curled but alert, watching. Without thinking, Clara began to draw. Her strokes came fast, precise, unfiltered. Ears, eyes, paws. The texture of the fur. The patterns on its cheeks. The short, expressive tail. Then the background, firelight, flickering. Shadowy shapes outside the window. A face beyond the glass. She stopped. She hadn't meant to draw that. In the corner of the page, in the faint glow of a drawn candlelight, stood another lynx, larger, eyes like twin embers. Clara's heart stuttered. She dropped the pencil and pushed the sketchpad away. The kitten didn't move, but its eyes narrowed slightly, as if it saw what she had drawn. No, Clara whispered. I didn't mean... She stood abruptly and turned away, busying herself with folding the blankets on the couch, arranging the throw pillows, refilling the water bowl. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The sky had cleared, revealing a sharp blue canopy. But in the woods just beyond the clearing, movement stirred in the tree line. A branch snapped. Clara's gaze darted to the window. She saw nothing, but the kitten, still on the hearth, rose slowly, body tense, nose twitching. It padded to the window and stared. Then it growled. The sound was low, far too deep for its size. And it wasn't a frightened sound. It was defensive, protective. Clara walked over, heart racing. What is it? From the edge of the trees, something stared back. Eyeshine. Gold against the shadowed trunks. Then it was gone. Clara locked the door again, bolting it this time. Later that evening, the wind rose again, sweeping snow from the roof like sand in a storm. Clara lit extra candles. The kitten remained close to her ankles, moving only when she did. She tried to ignore the sensation creeping in her spine, the feeling of being watched, followed, not just by eyes in the woods, but by something older than the cold. The fire crackled louder than it should have, and somewhere, behind the veil of night, the forest whispered. By morning, Clara would learn that some creatures don't appear by accident. Some are sent, and others are simply returning home. The forest remembers. The next morning brought no comfort. The snow had stopped, but a sharp wind raced down from the ridgelines, rattling the eaves and setting a low moan across the chimney. Clara stood on the back porch, mug of coffee steaming between her hands, her eyes scanning the tree line at the far edge of her land. There were prints in the snow, not hers, and not the kitten's. They were bigger, more spaced, heavier, with splayed toes and deep claw impressions. No human had made those. The prints didn't meander. They came in a straight line, from the woods to the base of her steps, then vanished. Clara slowly stepped back inside and shut the door with care. Her fingers trembled as she locked it behind her. The kitten, now fully settled in and behaving like a resident, was perched on the windowsill, its golden eyes fixed on the trees. It had barely moved all morning. No mews, no playful twitches, only stillness. She walked over and sat beside it. "You see it too, don't you?" The kitten didn't respond. It blinked slowly once and went back to watching. Clara pulled her coat tighter and grabbed the ranger station's number again. When Ben picked up, his voice was wary. "Clara? I've changed my mind," she said quickly. "Can you come out to the property?" "Something wrong?" "There are tracks around the house. Not deer. Something larger, clawed." He was silent for a beat. "Stay inside," Ben finally said. "I'll be there in about an hour." Clara hung up and turned to the fireplace, adding a log to the dying flames. The warmth returned quickly, crackling through the quiet, but it did nothing to settle the cold under her skin. To distract herself, she pulled out the sketchpad again. She flipped to a blank page and started to draw, but what came out wasn't the kitten. It was something else. A pair of glowing eyes behind the trees, a creature half lost in shadow, a shape with pointed ears, and shoulders far too broad for a normal lynx. She didn't remember drawing the claws until she saw them, long, curved, and rising from massive front paws. She dropped the pencil. The kitten turned from the window and looked at her. And then it did something Clara would never forget. It raised one paw, and with the edge of its claw, began to trace something onto the wood floor. A circle, then a line through it, then another, a symbol. "No," Clara whispered, heart hammering. What are you doing?" The kitten finished the shape and sat quietly beside it, tail curled neatly over its toes. She stared, unsure whether to laugh or scream. It was just an animal, wasn't it? But as the wind howled again, slamming hard against the window panes, something inside her cracked. Something old and buried. Memories of dreams, of running through snowdrifts under moonlight, of golden eyes in the dark. The knock on the door came just before noon. Clara jumped and nearly spilled the cup of tea she'd been holding. The kitten perked up instantly and leapt down from the window. Through the peephole, she saw Ben's familiar ranger coat. She opened the door quickly and stepped aside to let him in. "Show me the prints," he said without preamble. Clara led him out the back, where the snow had stayed mostly undisturbed, except for the tracks. Ben crouched, his thick gloves brushing the snow as he examined the impressions. "Definitely not a dog," he muttered. "Too big, and these—" He pointed to one track where the claws had dug in deep. "See how clean the imprint is? That's a lynx or possibly a mountain lion, but walking too close to the cabin. This one came with intent." "Could it be looking for the kitten?" Clara asked quietly. Ben looked up, startled. "Maybe, though I've never known one to come that close to humans. They avoid scent, like the plague." He rose to his feet and looked toward the forest. "You ever heard the stories around here?" he asked suddenly. Clara furrowed her brow. "What kind of stories?" He scratched his jaw. "Old mountain tales, from the First Nations, about the bobtail spirits, forest guardians, lynx that walk between worlds. Clara hesitated. I thought those were legends. Ben glanced at the kitten, which was once again sitting near the fireplace. Sometimes legends are just warnings nobody took seriously, he said, his voice low. You sure it was just a kitten you found? She didn't answer. That night, she dreamed. The dream began with snow. Always snow. Endless and blinding. She was walking through a dense pine forest, the trees whispering overhead. Branches brushed against her shoulders. But she wasn't cold. She was searching. A low growl echoed ahead. She turned. From the shadows, a great lynx emerged. Not the kitten. Full-grown, towering, ancient. Its fur was deep gray, streaked with ash and silver. Eyes the color of firelight. It spoke, but not with words. It showed her images, a hollow den, a cry of loss, something taken from the forest, a bond broken. She looked down in the dream and saw the kitten standing beside her, its head tilted upward. Then the forest began to bleed light, gold, white, and pulsing. She woke up gasping, tangled in sweat-drenched sheets, the room half lit by the dying embers of the fire. The kitten was gone. Panicked, Clara threw off the covers and stumbled into the living room. "Ash!" she called. Silence. She turned toward the front door and froze. The door was ajar. Wind moaned softly through the opening. She ran to it and threw it wide. In the snow, leading away from the house, were two sets of prints. One small, one large. The kitten hadn't been taken. It had gone. Clara stood in the doorway barefoot, the cold biting her skin, her heart twisting painfully in her chest. "Ash!" The forest in front of her was dark, still, but it wasn't empty. Somewhere beyond the edge of the trees, something had returned, and it had come for her. What Clara didn't know was that the forest had not come to take. It had come to offer. But first it would ask her to choose, remain safe in the world she knew, or step into a truth as wild as the snow itself. Eyes at the edge. Clara didn't sleep the next night. She sat in her armchair by the fire, a wool blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, a steaming mug untouched in her hands. The kitten, Ash, had not returned. The tracks had faded under the wind, and the woods had swallowed its small shape whole. But Clara felt no ordinary fear. What pulsed in her chest was something older. Recognition. The room flickered with firelight. The shadows danced too sharply. Every creak in the walls, every sigh of the wind sounded like movement just out of reach. It was near midnight when the knock came. Only it wasn't a knock, it was a weight, a presence that pressed against the walls of the cabin like a held breath. The flame in the fireplace bent unnaturally to one side. The temperature dropped suddenly, sharp enough that Clara saw her breath, even indoors. She stood, heart thudding. She moved slowly to the window, the same one where Ash used to perch, and she saw it. At the edge of the tree line, about 30 yards from the porch, stood the lynx. Not a kitten, not even an adult bobcat. It was massive, 4 feet tall at the shoulder, its fur a ghostly blend of silver and charcoal, ears tall and tipped in midnight black. Its body was still, regal, like it had grown from the forest itself. And its eyes. Those eyes weren't animal. They were intelligent, ancient, burning gold. Clara's breath caught. She didn't move. Neither did it. Then, slowly, the lynx took a step forward. Snow barely shifted beneath its paws. A second step, then a third. But it didn't approach the house. It turned its head toward the woods, and from behind it, from the tree line. Ash stepped out, alive. Not as the kitten Clara had cradled, but changed. Taller, sleeker. Its fur darker, like it had been dusted with ash and frost. It still had the same golden eyes, but something shimmered beneath them, like light on deep water. Ash padded forward and sat beside the larger lynx. Clara gasped quietly. Her hand clutched the window frame. "Ash!" Then the large lynx lifted its gaze and looked directly into hers. Clara felt it, not on her skin but in her mind. A voice. No, a presence. You gave warmth to what the cold had marked. She staggered back, dizzy. Her knees hit the floor. Outside, the lynx blinked once, slowly. Then both turned and vanished into the trees without a sound, leaving behind a trail of prints that stopped 20 feet from her door. And in the center of them, just one item, a perfect circle drawn into the snow. The same symbol Ash had scratched into her floor, the circle and the choice. Clara didn't remember opening the door. One moment she was kneeling on the wooden floor, staring at the empty yard beyond the window. The next she was barefoot in the snow, the cold stinging her soles like needles. But she didn't feel pain, only purpose. The wind had stilled. The woods, usually murmuring with shifting trees and the rustle of owls, were silent. She stepped toward the circle in the snow. It was perfect, etched with a precision no paw could manage. Lines, sharp, deep, deliberate. Just standing near it made her head buzz, like pressure building behind her eyes. Then she heard it again. A whisper. Not from the air, but from the earth itself. "Ash!" The name barely formed on her lips when the trees parted. The great lynx stepped forward. But this time, it didn't walk as a beast. As it crossed the boundary of the tree line, its form shimmered. The muscles and fur shifted like smoke unraveling. Its shape collapsed inward and reassembled, not into another animal, but into a woman. She stood just over 6 feet tall, barefoot in the snow, her cloak made of lynx fur that rippled down her back like living fire. Her hair was a cascade of silver, braided down to her waist. But her eyes, those golden, burning eyes, were unchanged. They were Ash's. They were the forest's. Clara couldn't breathe. The woman's voice came like a thought, not spoken, but pressed directly into her chest. "You returned what was forgotten." Clara blinked. I don't understand." "You gave milk to a fading ember, nurtured it, protected it, without knowing what it truly was." The woman lifted her hand. In her palm sat a curled form, Ash, the kitten again, sleeping peacefully, entirely unchanged. An illusion, a memory, Clara didn't know. "You were not chosen for your strength," the woman continued. "You were chosen for your ache." Clara's throat tightened. "You felt me," she whispered. "From the beginning." The woman nodded. "The forest remembers kindness, even the smallest act." "What do you want from me?" Clara asked, her voice barely a breath. The woman stepped closer, not threatening, not demanding. "Nothing." She tilted her head slightly. "But the wild offers gifts to those who ask nothing in return." Clara looked down at the circle. "And if I step in?" "You do not return the same." Behind the woman, Ash, older, wiser, stood once more in its larger form, the lynx of fire and snow, waiting. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to forget who I was," she whispered. The woman smiled, software fierce. "You won't. You'll remember more than you ever thought you'd lost." And with that, the woman stepped backward into the shadows. Ash followed. The circle pulsed once with light. Clara stared at it, then took her first step forward, into something ancient, into something waiting. That night, the storm didn't return. But when Clara crossed the threshold back into her cabin, something had changed. Not just in the forest, in her. A gift without asking. Clara stood just inside her cabin, snow melting around her boots, her breath still visible in the warm air. But she didn't feel cold. Not anymore. The fire had dimmed to glowing embers, but the room was lit, not by flame, but by something softer, a light that came from nowhere and everywhere at once, humming like a memory too old to forget. She sat down in the armchair, facing the hearth. Her hands trembled, but her heart was steady. The circle in the snow had vanished the moment she stepped back inside, but the change had not. She felt it in her chest, a quiet awareness, like her heartbeat no longer belonged just to her, but to something greater, as if the trees outside now breathed with her, as if her grief had not been erased, but woven into something alive. On the mantel above the fireplace, a single pine cone had appeared. It shimmered faintly in the firelight, covered in delicate frost. Clara reached for her sketchpad, her fingers moving with purpose. This time, she didn't draw the lynx, or the woman, or the snow. She drew her husband's face, Luke. She hadn't been able to paint him since he died. Every line felt wrong, every feature blurry, out of reach. But now it came as naturally as breathing, not just the shape of his eyes or the angle of his jaw, but the way he smiled when he was watching her cook, the way his brows furrowed when he read in bed, the way his hand would pause, midair, before reaching for hers. The tears came fast, falling onto the paper and bleeding into the lines. She didn't wipe them away. She kept drawing. The kitten, Ash, appeared again in her mind, curled beside the fire. A guardian, a messenger, a gift. And a mirror. She understood now. Ash had not come to her to be rescued. Ash had come to rescue her. Her grief had kept her frozen. The forest had sent something to thaw her soul. A voice echoed softly from the depths of her thoughts. You didn't ask for anything, and so everything became possible. Clara closed the sketchbook and leaned back, the edges of her mind quiet for the first time in years. She was still alone, but no longer empty. Outside, the wind had calmed. The trees no longer loomed. They stood, watchful. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of roads and maps, a lynx watched the stars from a mountain ridge, waiting. But even magic, when it leaves, must do so quietly. And when Clara woke the next morning, she would find only one thing at her doorstep: a single track in the snow, and the sense that her life had been rewritten without a single word, where the snow leaves no trace. Magic never says goodbye. It simply steps aside and lets you walk forward. The morning came with a pale, silver sky. No wind, no sound. Just the stillness that follows something sacred. Like the air itself was holding its breath. Clara rose from bed without hesitation. No grogginess, no ache in her chest. Her heart, long quiet under layers of sorrow, now beat with purpose. She wrapped herself in a wool shawl and stepped out onto the porch, the snow crunching lightly beneath her slippers. The yard lay untouched, a blanket of clean white stretching to the woods. All except one mark. In the center of the clearing, where the snow had once held a circle of ancient symbols, now rested a single paw print. Broad, clean, deep. It pointed back toward the forest, like a farewell that knew it would not be repeated. Clara stepped down the porch stairs slowly. She approached the print and stood over it, breathing deeply. It was not a message, it was a promise. She knelt beside it and placed her hand gently in the impression. The size was staggering, twice the width of her palm. And yet, it radiated warmth beneath the snow, as if the forest had left its pulse behind just for her. Then, as she stood, a breeze passed through the clearing, software almost playful. The print dissolved, but Clara didn't feel loss. She turned back to the house, where the windows glowed with soft morning light. Inside, her sketchpad waited, alongside a half-finished painting of Luke, and a new one she had started without realizing. It was of Ash, perched on a ridge, silhouetted against stars, eyes the color of hearthfire. In the weeks that followed, Clara painted every day. She found herself rising with the sun, walking the forest trails again, sketching fallen trees, ravens in flight, snow melting off moss-covered stumps. Her hands no longer shook. Her memories no longer burned. And one day, she opened a blank page and wrote the first sentence of her next book. He came with winter in his fur and silence in his paws, but he left spring in my heart. She titled it, Ash of the Pines. It became a quiet success, not flashy, not loud, but those who read it said it made them cry, that it made them believe in something again. Clara never told the full truth, not to readers, not even to Ben, who sometimes checked in with coffee and questions he never asked aloud. But she knew. The forest had tested her, and she had passed. And somewhere out there, beneath the stars and snow, a pair of golden eyes still watched over the pines, waiting not for thanks, but for the next soul willing to open their door in the cold. Not for rescue, but to remember who they were before the world made them forget. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness, a bowl of milk, a warm blanket, an open door, can ripple through the world in ways we never expect. Clara didn't save the kitten to gain anything. She simply chose compassion over indifference. And in doing so, she unlocked something ancient, something deeply human, the power to heal. Not just others, but herself. We don't always know what people or animals carry in their silence. But when we choose to care, even in our loneliest moments, we may find that we were never truly alone. Kindness doesn't need recognition to be powerful. It only needs to be real. Here at Paw Prints and Stories, we believe that every paw print tells a story. And sometimes, it's the one that finds you when you least expect it that changes everything. If this story moved you, maybe it's because there's a part of you still listening for footsteps in the snow, still hoping for your own return. So here's a challenge. This week, extend one act of kindness, with no expectation. You may not see what comes of it, but maybe, just maybe, something will find its way back to you.